One early morning in March of 2017, we embarked in what turned out to be a 2-year documentary journey in search of Julius John Lankes, the distinguished artist, woodcutting master, and printmaker. Lankes' best-known work was produced in the period between the two great wars in the first half of the 20th century. This magnificent body of work is irreversibly linked to Robert Frost and to a plethora of artists, publishers, and intellectuals who favor a utopian vision of America, one that radically opposed the plight of industrialization and the dismay of the agrarian republic. Julius John Lankes was born in Buffalo, New York, in August 31, 1884, in the bosom of a blue-collar family of German ancestry drawn to America by the prospects of the Erie Canal and the promise of a booming mercantile future. By the turn of the century, Buffalo had already become one of the most prosperous and densely populated metropolis in the New World. In 1901, Buffalo hosted the Pan American Exposition, a World Fair extravaganza remembered to this day as the site where, on September 14th, then-President William McKinley was assassinated. The killer was a disenfranchised worker of anarchist persuasion who regarded McKinley as the embodiment of capitalism and a threat to America's working class. The following year, Lankes graduates as a junior engineer from the Buffalo Commercial and Electromechanical Institute, in time to confront the challenges that were reshaping America from the agrarian paradigm it was into a world-class industrial power. His first employment came as a draftsman, drawing technical transcriptions of ideas for inventions and patent registrations. Still, Lankes aspired to more. Following a 1,000 soul-searching canoe trip to the Mississippi, he enrolled with the Arts Students League of Buffalo, a school forged in the hallways and exhibition rooms at the Fine Arts Academy. He was determined to become an artist. Leading the men's evening live class at the Art Students League was Ernest Fosbury, a Canadian artist of great influence among students and a major force behind the establishment of the Saturday Sketch Club.
This was 1910, and he wanted something where it was very open. It was an organization that allowed women to be members. One of the founding artists was Edie Bartlett, who became J.J.'s wife. So this membership of women was pretty important because of the exclusivity of so many of the artist groups in and around not only this region, but what was typical of the era.
But he found it very difficult to make a livelihood as an artist. And so he took another job as a draftsman at a manufacturing firm in Buffalo that manufactured custom-made sporting rifles, and very often these weapons would have designs engraved on their wooden stocks. And so in 1917, he borrowed one of the graving tools from his employer and took a block of apple wood and cut a single design.
Lankes admired the works of German engravers of the Renaissance, a tradition that was now being reclaimed throughout Europe and around the world. Woodcut artists and printmakers, fueled by a revolutionary spirit shaking the ideological foundations, were now thriving throughout the world, particularly in Latin America, where the generation of Guadalupe Posada embraced woodcutting to explore the psyche of the Mexican Revolution.
The radical ideas that were taking shape in Europe in the late teens electrified Llankes' thinking. And he was always interested in American figures who had had a strong influence on bringing a freer, more liberal America.
Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever!
Like most progressive-minded intellectuals of his time, Llankes contributed with left-wing publications, particularly those put out by the Communist Party.
When I talked to J.B. Llankes about this, J.B. said, "Oh no, is this revisionist history trying to look back at his father?" And he said that was not the case. But I think you have to see his affinity for working with the masses and the Liberator and the Floydels and the other characters, the Harry Red clubs and things like that. That you really have to say, okay, his affinities were for that, and that was at a particular moment in time that can make sense in American society. When you have other artists like Rockwell Kent, who worked in the same era as Llankes, had very similar affinities as Llankes. He ended up leaving many of his personal art collection to the people of Russia.
Llankes' affinity with the Communist Party was short-lived. Disillusioned with collectivism, he will eventually embark in his own iconoclastic path to individualism.
War. Precisely at dawn on September 1st, without warning.
One of Llankes' most significant early prints was a reinterpretation of Man with a Hoe, a painting by Jean-François Millet that generated great controversy in Paris when in the early 1860s was considered to be a socialist provocation. In rendering an identical subject, Llankes expressed a similar concern for the role and fate of the rural worker in America. Other designs from the same period, mostly endearing portrayals of American life, can be read as a manifesto, a tribute to the agrarian republic. One such portrayal, published by The Liberator, was noticed by one of America's most celebrated poets, resulting in the enduring dialogue between Llankes' art and the writings of Robert Frost. It was the beginning of a lifelong friendship based in common ideological interest and an extraordinary coincidence in taste.
In August 1924, J.J. Llankes took a trip to Vermont to Robert Frost, bringing along with him Charles Birchfield and William Schwanenkamp. On the way, they stopped at Woodstock, New York, and they met George Bellows and visited a little bit, and then Bolton Brown, who became extremely well known for his lithography. And they did a little practice session. And then they were on their way to Vermont. One of the things that Frost said at the end of the evening is that he killed the fatted watermelon for them to share. They slept in the barn on freshly mowed hay. It was a great experience all around.
Almost every time he visited Frost's farm in South Shaftesbury, Vermont, he made drawings for future woodcuts. As a matter of fact, on the very first time he visited Frost in 1924, while Frost talked, Llankes sat and made sketches. I'll show you one of these. This is the railroad station in South Shaftesbury, where Llankes arrived in 1924 for his first visit. And it's right down the hill from this house right here, which today is the Robert Frost Museum. But Frost was living there at the time.
Robert Frost felt that Llankes' depiction of the rural landscape was a graphic representation of his own work. The same characters and pastoral scenes found in Frost can be traced to Llankes' prints, thus rendering one's work as a fitting visual accompaniment to the other.
My long two-pointed ladder's sticking through a tree toward heaven still, and there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough, but I am done with apple picking now.
Of the more than 1,300 woodcuts known to have been produced by J.J. Llankes, 125 were inspired or directly connected to Robert Frost.
Perfect.
Birchfield met Llankes in 1922. At the time, Birchfield was working for the M.H. Burge & Sons Company designing wallpaper. And he moved to Gardenville in 1925, and that is where Llankes was living. So they were neighbors and artist friends. And in their collaboration, Birchfield would draw the design. The block would go to Llankes, he would carve it, and then they'd exchange back and forth with some proofs in between to make decisions on how the alteration should be done. But at the same time that they were doing prints of American life, small town American life, which both men appreciated, they also did a series of religious prints. Interestingly, they don't have typical religious subject matter. They're more nature and cosmic, and I think it's because both the men were not religious. Birchfield was an atheist, or at least an agnostic at that point in time, and Llankes was one of the very few people that he could really reveal his true feelings to. There was a lot of social pressure to conform.
In the spring of 1925, Llankes embarked on a personal journey to Europe. He arrives in Germany at the height of the Weimar Republic, a period of cultural empowerment dominated by political tensions that will serve as the platform for the rise of Adolf Hitler. However, Llankes is there to preserve the past, to sketch ancestral memories that would later be carved on blocks of wood and printed. While in Europe, he also visits cultural landmark sites throughout Italy, France, and the Netherlands. Upon his return to the United States, Lankes settles in Hilton Village, a small Virginian coastal town by the James River. No longer in the progressive-minded and liberal New England, Lankes is now living in the provincial South of Confederate veterans and Jim Crow. Life in rural Virginia offered Lankes a landscape that in many ways predated the Industrial Revolution, a world in which machines were not yet about to replace manual labor, affording Lankes a unique opportunity to document life as it was. In 1926, another Yankee found in Williamsburg the inspiration to rebuild the village that served as the center of government, education, and culture in colonial times. His name was John D. Rockefeller Jr., and his vision has served ever since as a living history museum. However, it is in Lankes' Virginia woodcuts that Williamsburg remains truthful to its nature in times of the Great Depression. Wilford Taylor, Emeritus Professor of English Literature at the University of Richmond, is a meticulous researcher, an accomplished self-made art historian, and biographer of Julius John Lankes. A picture framed, a photograph, or an open drawer in his crowded studio could easily trigger the most stimulating conversations.
Yes, in 1929, while he's at Frost Farm, he stayed there for 2 months. He was given a commission by Rockwell Kent to carve about 25 designs for an advertising company in New York City. Rockwell Kent drew the designs himself, created the designs, and got paid Lankes a flat fee to carve all the blocks. And Kent, long story, we didn't have enough portable phones to put one out here, so we just used the old style one.
That's from the last century.
Ha! Boy, you're close to being right. The subject of the designs was the history of industry. Traditional industries such as logging, factories, steam locomotives. Well, collectors ought not to brag, but if I were allowed one brag about items in my Sherwin-Anderson collection, it would probably be this volume, because it's a presentation copy from Anderson to J.J. Llankes with admiration. The first thing that Anderson did when he decided to move to Virginia was to build a country house some 20 miles out of Marion, south of Marion, near a village called Troutdale.
The friendship with Sherwood Anderson resulted in a remarkable collaboration, one that becomes particularly relevant in Perhaps Woman, a collection of essays. Anderson's idea that women will reassert the human qualities relinquished by men to the efforts of the mechanized industry was interpreted by Lankes with the image of a woman on horseback leading a man riding a mule. His frequent visits to Anderson's cottage in Trotsdale also resulted in a significant number of woodcuts representing the Appalachian landscape and the Blue Ridge Mountains.
You asked me about John Henry. Let me show you. This is John Henry
was a steel-driving man. Carried his hammer.
Folk singers and balladeers have made a legend of John Henry. In the 1920s, Rock Bradford mined the veins of the American Negro folk tradition for literary material, much as Mark Twain had drawn upon the tales of the Mississippi River. Lankes was asked to illustrate Bradford's novel, a racial portrayal of the conflict between manual labor and industry, by now a recurrent and dear theme to Lankes.
John Henry went to the mountain top.
If Lankes' collaboration with Robert Frost was based in the shared commitment to the utopian ideal of the agrarian republic, and with Sherwood Anderson in hopes that women would redeem men from their failure to stop the advancement of a mechanized society, his work with Rock Bradford manifests concerns with the displacement of manual labor and the exploitation of the African American working man as cheap labor.
Laid down his hammer and he
In the end, Lankes, just as John Henry in Bradford's novel, will be defeated by progress. In coming years, the evolution of newspapers and magazines will not renew its commitment to illustration, and Lankes will witness the final days of wood carving in America, a revival that he contributed to inspire.
like a man took and drive with his hammer like a man.
In 1932, Robert Frost, sensing that Lankes was having these difficulties, found out about an opening for an art professor at a small college up on Lake Cayuga in the Finger Lakes region of New York. And so beginning in 1932, Lankes became a faculty member at Wells College, a position that he held for 7 years until 1939.
Perhaps Lankes found himself at home in Wells College, in the familiar landscape of New England, removed from the domestic constraint of Hilton Village and the provincial South.
I honestly think he enjoyed his time there, and I think might have been a little bit about getting back up north, getting back into the upstate New York area. It's not far, maybe a few hours from Buffalo, so that the people's political views, their value system is maybe more akin to what he was raised with versus what he experienced in Virginia. And then to be in a position to shape the minds of young and influential students and to try to get them to see the world through his lens. I think, why do people become teachers?
Still, Lankes remained uninspired by academic life and discouraged with the headlines in a world once again at the brink of war. It was about then that Lankes became romantically involved with a woman named Madeline Schumann, an affair that asserted a final blow to his marriage. Our journey was almost over. The trials and tribulations of a Yankee printmaker in Virginia were coming to an end. In the post-war years, Lankes was able to secure a position as technical illustrator with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the federal agency that preceded NASA. Although the job brought relief and financial security, it also meant going back to the drawing board as a draftsman, a position he relinquished 40 years earlier. During this period, Lankes managed to work and advance his Pennsylvania Dutch Barn series, which he estimated to be his crowning achievement.
You can't measure the success of a committee by a box score based on the number of communist heads that have rolled from secret jobs. It is completely impossible to even estimate the effect on our government of the day-to-day plotting exposure of communists.
The Cold War brought into effect a fearless anti-communist crusade. The purge was particularly targeted to federal employees suspected of ever having sympathies or connections to the Communist Party.
I think his NASA years were definitely some of trying to figure out what to do with the remaining years of his life and getting a government job and having some income security. And at that point, sure, there's all this arms race and the Cold War issues that are going on, and when you're working in aeronautics and you know that everybody else is trying to invent atom bombs and race to space, and I think that there's going to always be in the back of one's mind, well, what is this about? And he was going to challenge. He was going to always challenge a status quo or even what the policy might be. And I think that might have been part of the reason he was dismissed from NASA. And I think one had said Rockwell Kent even knew that it might have been communist leanings that Lankes had that were the cause of it.
Well, Lankes had had a terrible stroke, and he was put in a nursing home and could say very, very little and had very little movement in his upper body. And Frost came to Chapel Hill to give a reading, as he did every year. And so he knew that Lankes was quite ill, so he went to the nursing home to visit with him. And they looked at each other, and they exchanged a very simple greeting. And it went something along the lines of, "God damn it all," said Frost, and "God damn it all," said Lankes. Frost touched Lankes' cheek and turned around and left. And that was the last time they ever saw each other. Lankes died just a few weeks later.